All right, well, we're going to get started. I see a lot of familiar names, so thanks for joining us today as we talk about estate planning and we also talk about funeral arrangements. I know, really important topics, though. And we have Ryan Roach here with us, so he will be talking about all those different options, and he is from Rose Hills, which, as you may know, is a very famous and well-known mortuary and cemetery here in Southern California. But let's get right into it. First, we're going to talk a little bit about estate planning, and then Ryan will give his presentation. It'll be a good refresher for you to think about trust and wills again. And here we go. So, just a quick note about myself and our firm. We're Sakamoto and Relis. We handle estate planning, probate, and trust administrations. We have 4 attorneys now and staff, and we recently moved to Cerritos. So just this week we did, we're close to the 91 still off the Valley View exit, and we do have a Mission Viejo office. As you know, we are women and minority owned law firm, so we're here to serve you in, of course, English and Korean and Spanish languages. A little bit about me, of course. I have 16 years of trust and estates experience. Oh my gosh, how did it fly by so fast? But that's what it is. And I received my undergraduate degree from UC San Diego. I went to the University of the Pacific McGeorge School of Law up in Sacramento, just up and down the California coast. And I grew up in Cerritos, so now I'm back there and currently living in Cyprus, and I speak Korean. Just a quick disclaimer, of course, this is just for your information, right? There's no attorney-client relationship or privilege just from this presentation from either of us. This is not legal or tax advice, just very general information. Of course, if you have very specific questions, feel free to contact myself or Ryan outside of the presentation. We're going to be happy to get back to you and answer all of your questions. So, of course, what is an estate, right? It's things that you own: house, cars, bank accounts, personal property, businesses, even. I had a client recently with like royalties for like music. So those are all things that you own, right? So, of course, what would happen to those things if you're not there? What's an estate plan then, right? It's a plan for your estate, and it's documents like your trust and your will, power of attorney, all working together in your lifetime, and then even after you're passed, to manage your assets. The main purpose is to avoid the ugly court processes of conservatorships and probates. So conservatorship is like if you're alive but you can't manage things yourself, then someone else is appointed to make those decisions for you. Usually if you don't plan ahead. And with probate, if something happens to you and you pass, then where does your assets go? Of course, you didn't make that plan in advance, then no plan is still a plan. You would just have to follow the default California rules. And in either of these cases, going through court, really stressful, takes a long time, very expensive. So we're trying to avoid all that by preparing a trust and having a complete estate plan. And these are all the documents that we're going to provide. In this presentation, I'm going to really focus on the basics, but also a little bit more on the healthcare power of attorney as it relates to mortuary and funeral planning, because that's also a very important part of it as well. So will my estate go through probate? It really depends. So currently, if you have assets in California over $184,000 total, right? And this number actually changes every 3 years because of inflation. I don't set it. Of course, the court sets it and they let us know. But it's $184,000 gross value. So if you own a home in California, I mean, it's going to be over that. So you better make sure that it's either titled in a very specific way, which we'll get to, or put into your living trust. That's the way to avoid probate. And if you typically just have a will only, then you still might have to go through court. And that's a misconception. People are like, oh, I have a will, like I'm not going to be in court. Not necessarily, right? If you do have a will, but your assets are over this amount, it could be that you still have to go through probate, but the will just directs who's in charge as the executor and then how those assets go. So, what are assets that are not subject to probate? So, I had a client who had $1 million in the bank, but they did not have any real estate. So, in this case, it might not go through probate court if the bank accounts are owned as joint accounts with right of survivorship, or they maybe have named beneficiaries on these accounts. Anytime you have a situation where it's a bank account, real estate, a car, like where does this go? There's no joint account holder, there's no beneficiary. Then, of course, the court has to decide, and that is probate. So usually IRAs, 401ks, make sure you have those named beneficiaries. Now is a good time to double check, who did I put as a beneficiary? Sometimes clients, especially when they have children who are little, they put like, aunt and uncle or someone else because, kids can't manage those assets. And then they forget about it. And then, something happens and it's like, oh my gosh, it's someone else as a beneficiary. Actually, that's a case that we're going through right now in our office too. So let this be a reminder, just double check who is on those IRAs, 401ks, life insurance as beneficiaries. So then the question is, okay, well, who is going to get my assets if I do no plan, right? Then obviously it's the default laws of California, which you may or may not like, right? I had a client who was, well, I mean, it's very typical. Like they may not have a spouse or kids, and they just have elderly parents. So then it's like if something happens to me, the next of kin would be the elderly parents, but then if they pass too, then it's like whatever their default is. So sometimes I say maybe you need to have a plan to maybe give it to younger nieces and nephews instead of you pass and then your elderly parents pass, and then it's like whatever they had planned, right? You could also, of course, set up a trust and will. Then you can decide where the assets would go. Typically, kids, right, or spouse. Could be charity, could be, neighbors, friends. Be careful of caregivers, though. There's very strict laws about that. And you would think like, oh, it's like someone who cares for me and who's watching over me. Well, just because there's an issue of undue influence a lot of the times, and elderly people are sometimes vulnerable and get influenced. So there are some strict laws if you want to give to a caregiver, but there's ways around it too. So you just have to know what those requirements are. So what is a revocable living trust? It is an agreement, right? It's like if something happens to me, you're setting up the next person to know your wishes and to manage your things for you. I trust you to manage my things for me when I can't do it myself. And it's very customizable and revocable, which means you can change it, you can update it, put assets in, take things out, sell things, that's what you can do. But it's actually just like an entity, a trust, and you have to title things into the name of the trust. So it's a little bit different because now this property is not in your name anymore. It's not in Ryan's name. It's like Ryan, trustee of Ryan's trust. So, and if you're not here, then it's the next person is the trustee of Ryan's trust, and the next person would be the trustee of Ryan's trust. So, you can see that there's a plan of, okay, if something happens to them, then the next person, then the next person. That's how it stays out of court, because the court doesn't have to decide each time, okay, like, oh, this person died, like, who's next? We already have it written down. But to be effective, we have to title things in the name of the trust. That's going to be most important. I did have a client who did everything right. They set up this trust 20 years ago, and then they forgot to put this new property into the trust. They forgot they had a trust, and they just put it into their name. They passed away. So right now we have like a probate that's happening and a trust administration. So it's like, you did everything right. If only they had put that house in the trust. So we really have to be careful about titling those assets. So there's all the very important provisions of the trust, which is like a trustee. A trustee is like the manager, they handle things, but you also have a beneficiary, and sometimes they're the same people and sometimes they're different. A beneficiary is someone who actually gets the money. Sometimes they could be little kids and they can't manage things. So maybe you have someone else, aunt and uncle, to be a trustee until kids reach a certain age or you feel like they're mature enough to handle things, then you can always update and make sure that the trustee and the beneficiary is the same person. Um, Distribution provisions, just setting forth how and when those assets are going to be managed and distributed. I also included here a schedule of assets. Now, some estate plans don't do that. Some of the older estate plans that I've seen really don't have a complete schedule of assets. They'll just be like, everything like I intend to put in the trust. But it's really not effective when you do it that way because if something happens to you, how's the next person going to know what to do? How do they know like what bank to go to? How do they know that you have this like random life and life insurance from like 20 years ago? They would not know. So it's important for you to write that down just to make it easier for the next person who's handling things so they don't miss anything, right? And these are the type of different trusts. There's so many. I'm just going to go through some of the popular ones. A separate property trust. We've been doing a lot of that lately. If you are married, but you have assets that are your separate property, or maybe you're getting a big inheritance and you don't want to make it community, which means that if something happens to you, you don't want it to go to your spouse, you want it to go to your kids, or maybe stay with your family, you can create a separate property trust. So sometimes clients have three trusts. They'll have like one separate property trust for spouse, one for the other spouse, and then a community one, a joint one. So you can have a separate property trust as a tool to make things a little bit cleaner, to just completely separate that. You could also have a pet trust. So sometimes clients love their pets. Maybe they don't have kids or they really want to make sure that they're protected. True story, I created a pet trust. It was like $100,000 they set aside for Fluffy. I will never forget it. They put their name right in the trust documents. And if something happened, then they set aside this money for the care of their pets, health issues, board and care, like all that. And if they pass, then some of that money could go to the person who's getting the pet. And if not, then it goes back into the trust for the other beneficiaries. A gun trust, California is very strict about where the guns go and like if the license or permits and all that stuff. You can't just like give a gun to somebody, right? It's like, where did you get this gun from? You want to protect the trustee because if something happens to you, now they have this gun, they're not licensed for it, they're not registered or anything, and then something happens, right? So this gun trust allows the trustee to have the authority to possess those guns and gives them special instructions about transferring it to third parties. Special needs trust, if you know clients, families who have children with a disability and maybe they're receiving government benefits, well, when parents die, they get this big inheritance. And number one, they may not be able to manage it. And number two, if they are receiving any government benefits, now the government's like, oh, you have this money, you don't need the government benefits anymore, and they can stop that. Well, there's something called the special needs trust where you can set aside those funds in a very special trust to be used together with those government benefits. So it's working together instead of superseding them. A charitable trust, if you have a large estate, or maybe you want to reduce your taxable estate, or you just want to provide for charities, you can create a charitable trust. A dynasty trust, sometimes you don't want to give your kids all that money all at once, or maybe ever. Maybe they have a spending problem, a drug problem, a gambling problem, or something like that, where you don't want to give them a big chunk of money. Sometimes clients put the assets into a dynasty trust where they can get the income and use it for whatever they need, like health, education, maintenance support, very specific categories, but they never get the principal. They only get the income. And then when they pass, it goes to their kids or whatever type of beneficiaries that you want. So they never get the principal. They can only use it for specific things, and maybe they can get the income. So those are some just very popular types of trusts that you can create. So then people ask me, well, what's the difference between a trust and a will, right? So as I explained, you have a trust. Everything that's titled into the trust does not go through probate. Anything else that you own is going to be covered by the will. And in a regular will, you would say like, oh, everything to, so and so. But in a special will that you do together with the trust, you're going to say if something happens to me and my assets have to go through probate, or it's like, where does this go? Then I give it to my trust. So really, the trust is going to be the main document, and the will is just like a backup plan. right? So here is how they work together. Everything in the trust avoids probate. If you forget an asset, you forgot to put it in the trust, then the will's going to catch everything and pour it into the trust to be distributed the way the trust says. Otherwise, these assets just go by the default laws of California, which maybe we don't want. If you do have children under 18, very important to do some estate planning, because if something happens to the parents, like who's taking care of these kids, right? Especially if they're under 18. Is it wife's side of the family? Is it like dad's side of the family? Like who's taking care, right? And we don't want a big fight in court. So we do want to name the guardians. The court's going to ask, did the parents have a will? Did they name anybody? So we want to say, yes, we did. Talked about a conservatorship. So just some different ways to avoid probate. Of course, make sure you do estate planning with a revocable living trust. If you have real estate, if you have kids who are minors, right, they can't handle things on their own. Make sure if you have a company, make sure those shares of the company are titled in the trust as well. That company has value, right? And it's gonna, if it's over that $184,000 threshold, we don't want it to go through probate. If you are like, you know what, this trust seems crazy, I want to just put it on my deed as like joint tenancy or community property, that's another way that you might avoid probate. But if everybody on title is not there, it will go through probate. Also making sure that there's beneficiary designations on accounts, right? Beneficiaries. There is something called a transfer on death deed, which we can talk about. It's probably not going to be used until I think it expires maybe next year. There's also a small estate affidavit. If you did have a bank account, but it's less than $184,000, then you're able to do like an affidavit to just get the money, typically like in a bank or something like that. And using life insurance. So really want to emphasize life insurance as a good estate planning technique. I know Ryan's going to talk a little bit about this, but it can pay for funeral costs, right? Because if something happens to you, who's paying those funeral costs, and do they have access to those funds right away? And remember, you might be losing an income source at death, right? Especially if there's like a married couple or maybe someone with dependents. So we want to make sure there's enough life insurance to take care and cover the mortgage if necessary. So use life insurance as a tool for planning. Something you may not know, some policies may contain something called a living benefits rider. Like you don't have to wait till you're not here to use these death benefits. If you have a qualifying condition like a terminal or critical chronic illness, you could use some of that life insurance now when you need it, instead of, after your death. Okay, so that can also be a strategy for you. There's a power of attorney for finances and also for healthcare. Just briefly with the finances, this has to do with any assets that are not in the trust, so just in your name. And something happens where you are alive, but you're incapacitated, right? So think about this. If you don't have any planning right now, if you're like in a coma, right? Who has access to those bank accounts? Who can sign for you? Who can sign that deed to sell a house if needed? Right? So make sure you have this financial durable power of attorney to be able to do things for you on your behalf for assets that are not in a trust. Maybe it's a 401k, maybe it's a retirement account. But also very important to have an advanced healthcare directive. This is also known as a power of attorney for healthcare. So the one I just talked about was for finances, banks, real estate, that kind of stuff. And this is for healthcare. This names an agent who can make health decisions for you, not to be confused with like a DNR or like a POLST, a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment. This is a form to name an agent, and that agent makes decisions for you. So it's not like the doctor looks at this and be like, oh, okay, I got to do X, Y, and Z. It names an agent. The agent will then look at those and know your preferences and can speak to the doctor, the hospital, a nursing home, and the mortuary even after death to make those decisions for you. It's also really important because it sets a priority of who can make those decisions. I'm sure you've heard those horror stories about like families all fighting, no cremation, no burial, no, they're going to be here, no, they're going to be there, and like, all this fight. Well, if they had designated one person, right, like that person, a trusted person would make those decisions. And I know that Ryan actually dealt with that today. He'll probably tell you that story in a little bit as well. And let's see here. I was hoping to get through a hypothetical, but I will save that for the end. Just some closing remarks. Make sure to update your estate plan when life events happen: marriage, birth, death, disability, retirement, right? It's important to keep an up to date inventory of your assets. Make sure those beneficiaries are on there. Choose your agents and trustees very carefully. I mean, and update those as necessary, right? And plan early before anything happens, right? Because if you're in it, it might be too late. All right. Well, thanks for the presentation. I know I want to tell you so many things, but I wanted to get through it quickly to have enough time for Ryan. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and share your screen now? And before I do, want to let you know that Ryan is a family services counselor at Rose Hills. And he is going to be doing a little presentation about just all your burning questions about this whole process of funeral planning and services and what options are there. Go ahead, Ryan, and share your screen.
Okay, thank you, Sophia. Great presentation, and appreciate the opportunity to join you tonight. And thanks for everyone for being here as well. All right, one moment. All right, so my name is Ryan Roach. I'm a family service counselor, and I'm employed by Rose Hills Memorial Park. My responsibility, I have a number of responsibilities. I think it's important to emphasize that I meet people on the worst days of their life when they lose a loved one. So there's a vulnerability to that, there's an intimacy in that, and there's a significant reward to helping these people that I meet and have a continual relationship with. I am their primary point of contact at Rose Hills. For those of you who are not familiar with Rose Hills Memorial Park and Mortuary, we are in Whittier. We are the largest public cemetery in North America. We own over 1,400 acres. Believe it or not, half of that acreage has not even been developed. I encourage anyone to have a tour. I'd be happy to give you a tour with me. So moving forward, if you think of all the conversations that we have, vacations, family, restaurants, all the conversations, the one that we probably don't have is what's going to happen to us when we die. It's not a fun conversation, and of course we don't want to think about it. Many people have their superstitions that it will bring them that much closer to death, understandably. So think about it. You get the call, someone you know dies. What now? You never thought about it, but now it's a reality. Now it's your responsibility, both financially and emotionally. So of all the questions that are going to come about, all the decisions that come about, cemetery, will this be a traditional cremation? Where are we going to go? How much is this going to cost? Who do we have to contact? Think about it. I'm going to say it again. You didn't want to think about it, but now it's dropped on your lap, and now you have to face those consequences. Oh, going back, pardon me. And also, most importantly, whoever would have died, what would they have wanted? These are the two most important questions. And did I do the right thing? If you look at this chart, these are the details that go into final arrangements. We're going to look at the personal preferences. Of course, that's unique to everyone. We're all individuals and we all have our preferences. The markers, or what you would commonly know as a headstone, there's various options and fonts. You could choose between granite or bronze, different sizes, different designs, different customizations. The interment rights. Interment rights, or what we also call property, is essentially the same. Of course, when you purchase property, it's not like you could build a home on that property. What you're really paying for is the right to be buried within that space. So that's known as an interment right. And then we get to the cemetery service fees. These are the fees involved to complete a burial. Outer burial container, also known as a vault, an outer burial container is what's going to protect the casket or caskets in the terms of a double depth vault, like a bunk bed. It's also going to protect the earth as well. And then you have the choices of your casket or an urn, wooden casket, steel casket, and then your urns, various designs, various materials from wood to ceramic and so forth. Funeral memorial service. What kind of funeral memorial service will you have? Will it be a graveside service? Will you be utilizing a chapel? Will this be a Christian service, Catholic service, Jewish? The list goes on, the options go on. And it's important to know and to record this. So again, so your loved one who may be making these, arrangements for you won't be lost and have that financial and emotional burden. And last, away from home protection. What away from home protection is, it is an option to pay a one-time fee of $499, and that's going to cover you if you're going to pass away over 75 miles from your place of residence. This would be a non-war zone anywhere in the world. So let's say you're going to pass away, God forbid, in Australia, that one-time fee will cover bringing you back. That's both the flight, the transportation fees, the container to get you here, the shipping container, air tray, and any consulate fees as well. Those can significantly add up to upwards of $20,000, believe it or not. So this can be done in 4 simple steps while you're alive, while you're with us, while you're sharing the presence of your loved ones. This could be done in the 4 simple steps. Number 1, reflecting on what's important to you. How do you want to be remembered? What's important? Going back to what we just were looking at, all those details of what we just uncovered. Number 2, recording these things, recording what is important to you, how you want to be remembered, and caskets, traditional burial, cremation, so that it's known, so your loved ones know what you want. You want to secure that. We'll get to that in a little bit. Of course, you can secure that. Not everyone has, the money lying around to pay for that in full. So like anything else, the pre-planning, thinking about this now, planning about it now will significantly protect your loved ones. And then you want to share this information. You want to share it with your loved ones, share what your wishes are, and share where this information will be kept. In a moment, I'll be going over what's called a personal planning guide. So we'll get to that later in the slides. Why secure now? On top of the emotional and financial burden to take that off of your loved ones, making these arrangements, let's take a look at the effects of inflation. I think if any of us have gone to the gas pump recently, we may have already be familiar with inflation. If we look at this chart here, this is actually on statistica.com, is noted at the bottom. You could see the increases significantly, going from the cost of college tuition, cost of a new home, cost of gas, cost of a new car, and the cost of a funeral. And we can emphasize the funeral in 1980, it would have been $2,779, and 2021, an average of $7,848. And this is the same service. And getting even more definitive on that, this is a real life scenario that I dealt with. I had a family that I met, worst day of their life. Their dad passed away, and they didn't have that discussion, and that's okay. But unfortunately, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, this is 2023. The services, property, completing the final arrangements came to $31,673. Now, if this would have been taken care of, let's say 2004, almost 20 years ago, before 2023, you'll see that would have been half the cost. And again, this goes back to the slides we were just looking at, taking the inflation into consideration. I should mention too, when you pre-plan, you could benefit by discounts and making interest-free payments as well. So what does Rose Hills require to complete a burial? There's going to be a few things there. Number one is a vault, like we mentioned, to protect the casket or the urn in the ground for lawn burial. And then two, the opening and closing of the property space, and a funeral director to be present. There we go. Some frequently asked questions. How much? Is there a payment option? Is it cheaper to have a cremation burial? Does Rose Hills handle the cemetery needs only? So how much? Is there a payment option? We'll start with the property or the interment rights. The cremation property starts at $6,525. I want to note at the bottom, this is going to include a 10% pre-need discount. So when you break that down, a minimum down payment to proceed with that most economical option is $652.50 down payment. In addition to that, it would be $69.91 for 84 months, interest-free, as noted at the bottom. As well, this is for two interment rights that we're talking about, for ultimately two burials. Traditional property or a full casket burial would start at $13,050. Down payment, the most minimum down payment would be $1,305 on that, with payments of $139.82 for 84 months. So if it's not obvious, we prefer to make it obtainable by pre-planning. How much? Is there a payment option? Is it cheaper to have a cremation burial? We're going to talk about the services now. For cremation services and funeral, that's going to start at $9,635. And that's going to break down to $160.58 for 60 months. For traditional services, again, full casket services and funeral, that'll start at $12,048, or that's broken down in the interest-free payments of $280 for 60 months. Does Rose Hills handle the cemetery needs only? I want to let you know, Rose Hills will handle all of the arrangements from the picking up of the decedent, the person that died, and the place of death to finalizing funeral services. We are a mortuary, crematory, and cemetery. Here's a few pictures I took some of our property options, starting with the most prestigious, most premier would be our private and semi-private estates. This would be for both traditional and cremation burial. The ones we're looking at right here would include 4 spaces, 2 interment rights each, meaning that you could have 8 burials altogether. Here's our standard lawns. You're probably more familiar with these. These are going to be standard lawns, so both for traditional and cremation burials. These are the above the ground options. You're going to see to the left are mausoleum crypts. That would be for traditional burial. Over to the right, also traditional burial. So you have outdoors and indoors. Outdoors left, indoors right. Here's some cremation property options. Starting with the upper left, those are cremation niches. Those can be personalized to the decedent, of course, with a picture, the urn. Some people put jewelry in there or a memento or something to kind of maybe bring back memories of that loved one. And you go in the middle, those are granite niches. And over to the right, this is unique. This is a cremation urn garden. So you would walk up that little trail there. Excuse me, this is a cremation trail. We'll get to the urn garden in a moment. So there's different options there with boulders, and you have upright monuments. So it's quite nice. It's something to see. And then down at the bottom, we have pre-developments. Just like a pre-developed home that you could purchase, the pre-developed option, you would be purchasing from a rendering. Of course, on a tour, I would show you where that space is being built. The advantage to doing that, just like purchasing a pre-developed home, there would be less expensive to purchase it this way. And then, of course, when it is developed, the price would go up significantly. And as I mentioned earlier, here are a couple of the urn garden cremation spaces. We have a number of chapel options if you wanted to use, starting with Skyros up at the top, up to 300 guests that would seat comfortably. Hillside Chapel, 185 guests. Memorial Chapel. Rainbow Chapel is the most intimate and our oldest chapel, 68 guests there. Our visitation center is designed really for the closest loved ones and friends of the decedent in a very intimate setting there. And those rooms will suit up to 50 guests. Our Garden View Center is the reception center, so you can have catering and reception there with food. This just opened up. Luckily, the COVID restrictions were finally lifted, and we opened that up a week ago now. You could take a picture of these. This is what I mentioned earlier, a personal planning guide. Feel free to scan the QR code. With Veterans Day coming up, I wanted to, of course, include the Veterans Pre-Planning Guide as well. This is a digital version, which you could review. I highly recommend sitting down with me. We would fill this out together. And by the way, you could use this anywhere. This would be an extension of your will or your trust. And this is going to be more specific to those details of finalizing these arrangements that we're talking about. Going back to Sophia's story, yes, I was sharing a story with her today about a probate. I'm dealing with a family, and I think after they're going through this, they realized if they could have done it all over again, that they would have designated an advanced healthcare directive. Unfortunately, and this happens frequently, I had multiple family members call in and wanting different things, and dealing with the attorney who ultimately cut the check, which I received today. And this could have really been a lot cleaner if the gentleman, the decedent, who passed away, this is their cousin, would have planned this out. No, again, no one wants to die, right? No one wants to think about dying, but we all have that in common. So again, I encourage you to scan that QR code, and that will give you the details into the arrangements that we're talking about now. Also, I wanted to mention regarding life insurance. You can certainly apply life insurance to everything we're talking about here in terms of property and the services here at Rose Hills. However, many times and almost all the time, a death certificate will need to be furnished. This will take time. So what Rose Hills will allow doing is to finance it. Rose Hills will use a third party to finance the property and service fees for the funeral. However, it's a 5% interest charge to do that. So this is about as simple as it gets here. Protect your loved ones, plan ahead. I'll read it out. When you secure your final arrangements in advance, you make your wishes known and give your loved ones peace of mind. It's one of the most thoughtful gifts you can give your family. Thank you very much. I'll give it back to Sophie. And by the way, I'm proud of everyone today to just opening this door in your mind and giving this some thought. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Wow, very informative and really good to know those different options. And sometimes people think, oh, it's like a cemetery, like they only do burials, but it's good to know that you do the crematory. They have that on site as well, so that's good. A question that I had, and if the participants do have a question, go ahead and put that on the chat to me only, unless you want everyone to know your question. But what happens if we start the process with Rose Hills, we make the payment, and then we move or something to like out of state? What happens to our deposit and the funds that we've paid?
Great question. So Rose Hills is part of Dignity Network. Dignity Network is owned by a parent company called Service Corporation International, which is a publicly traded company. I mention that because Dignity Network owns and is within that network, there are over 1,800 locations throughout North America. So getting back to the answer to your question, if you were going to move, we would see and identify what other location would be part of that network. If it's over 75 miles from the place that you're moving from, you could transfer. Let's put this in two pieces. You could transfer the property like for like, assuming that it's paid in full. Okay. And then as far as the services go, you could transfer that as well, like for like. The difference between the two, the property you would do while you're alive, the services part, that would be done when you would pass away. So, of course, like anything like this planning we're talking about, someone could talk to me, and then I would work internally through our network to, of course, change the address and put the notes accordingly into their file.
All right, great. Um, one of the questions that we got on the chat is, can you put a house in a trust if you have a mortgage on it? And the answer is yes. So there's something called the Garn-St. Germain Act, where if you have a revocable living trust, and it's for you, and you can put your residential house into that trust, no issues, right? If you do have an investment property or like an LLC or an irrevocable trust, you might have some issues. So you may want to get the lender's approval first before you put that into a trust. It's also going to depend on what type of trust it is. So, like I said, an irrevocable trust, maybe not. A revocable trust, which means you can make changes, most of the time, yes. All right. I don't think we have any more questions, but I encourage you that if you do want to speak to Ryan or myself about your particular situation, you have our information there on the screen, or of course, you can get a hold of us at any time. Thank you so much for spending your Wednesday evening with us, and thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Okay. All right, Ryan, great job. Let me see if I can stop.